So, Jemele,
Yes.
so happy to be in conversation with you.
And I'm happy to be in conversation with you.
We're going to bring our group chat to the bookstore.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe not.
I want to get right into it. As you know, I was texting Jemele as I was reading her book. Some stories I had heard before, but it was really just fascinating to me to read so many stories that I didn't know. And so I don't know about you guys if you've actually read it yet, but I read this book in 2 sittings. I could have read it in 1 sitting, but I had to slow myself down because I was enjoying, when you read a really good book, you're enjoying it so much. I had to slow myself down because I didn't want it to end. Jemele, bravo to you.
Thank
it was
you.
just beautifully.
That's a heck of an endorsement. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Beautifully told. I want to kick off with something that you and I have talked a lot about. A lot of people know you from your work at ESPN, your work as a sports journalist, but a lot of the book focused on your relationship with your mother, which I found to be quite fascinating. It really was. The thing that surprised me is this story was a journey of redemption, of love, forgiveness. And I'm just curious your thought of why you chose to focus so much of the book on your childhood and specifically your relationship with your mother.
Well, first of all, believe it or not, you're actually the first person I think that's asked me that.
Well, I'm a brilliant journalist.
That is true. If you watch her every Saturday on Cross Connection, we do know this. Now, honestly, it's because so much of what shaped me into who I am starts with my relationship with my mother. And I think that's a pretty relatable experience. And because some of the trauma she went through, because some of the issues that she had, I learned to navigate around some very adult things early. And so there's no way I can explain the person I am today without explaining the person I was then and how that made me see the world, why that drew me to writing. It had everything to do with the circumstances that I was under because writing was really very much a safe haven for me. And so, feeling not necessarily unsafe, but just feeling unstable in so many parts of my life growing up, writing gave me the opportunity to have the stability that I often craved and did not have as a child. So there's no way I could tell this story and not start there.
I'm curious because reading the book, it's different when you're the one on the receiving end of the relationship with your mother. But reading it, I found myself having a lot of sympathy and empathy for your mother. How did she respond to reading about how you wrote about your relationship?
Actually, she responded pretty well to that. Like that, I think she kind of had an idea of what was coming, and maybe, well, to be honest, I think she thought it was going to be a lot worse. Like she did. Like she thought that I was really going to use this opportunity to maybe vent some anger, because as I start the book, is my mother had this theory that I was still harboring anger toward her because of the way I grew up, which I really was not. So I think she thought I would be very harsh with her, and I wasn't. Just because there's so much lived experience I've had since then, so much more I understand about addiction, it's so much more I understand about her. So being harsh with her just didn't feel like the right tone. Yeah. Now, she did have some issues with the book. They just weren't about that. Which, there was a pretty big argument that her and I had about something that was in the advanced reader copy that is not in the final copy. And it was, I'll let her tell that story, okay. Right? I was like, I will allow her to tell that story if she ever tells it, maybe not. But we actually wound up coming to an agreement about it, but I still didn't feel right about putting it in there because she would have to deal with that in a public way that I don't think she would actually be ready for. Yeah. So I did it from a protective measure. I'll be totally honest, I'm not entirely sure it was the right decision to do it, but I can sleep at night. Yeah. And I think that says something in itself.
I think that's one of the beautiful things about writing a book. It's very rarely that you imagine writing this book like it's all going to get tied up in a pretty red bow at the end. And that's just not the process. You kind of agonize over what you left out, what you didn't write. I'm curious, when you were writing the book, had you forgiven your mother for things that happened?
Oh, man. This That forgiveness happened a long time ago. And but as much as I have forgiven her, I'm not entirely convinced she's forgiven herself. In fact, I'm pretty sure she really hasn't. And if any of you have seen, my mother and I appeared on Red Table Talk. That episode aired, I believe, Wednesday or Thursday, one of those days. And she was very emotional. Her and Jada Pinkett Smith's mom, they share a very relatable story, having had drug addiction issues. And Jada and I relate because we're the product of that and having to navigate around that addiction. And when the topic of forgiveness came up in terms of forgiving herself, she said sometimes that was the best answer she could have, just because I think it is still a day-to-day process for her. I think some days she feels that way, other days she doesn't. She lives with a lot of regret. And even though I have a totally different perspective on regret, it's probably, I'm in a privileged position to feel that way because, I don't have kids. So I don't know what that's like when you go through something as painful as she does, and then you make a slew of maybe poor decisions as a result of something that was a circumstance, in terms of sexual abuse that wasn't your fault, but it still impacts somebody else's life. So I don't know what that's like for her, but I do know that she's often very harsh with herself in a way that I wish she wouldn't be. And I think maybe that was, to get back to your first question, a reason why I explained everything that happened. I went into detail, but still felt the need to treat her delicately in the same token.
You did that beautifully because, like I said, I had empathy for her. Another thing that I found really just beautiful and striking, you've always had this bravado about you. I mean, even as a little girl, you stood up for yourself in a number of ways that I don't want to give too much away because I want you all to read the book. But there's a time where Jemele is confronted with violence, I'll say, by someone who was not family, but she was at a house. And just read the book. You'll know the story. But I just thought, where does this, little girl get this strength? And you kind of make that through line with the women in your life. So talk a bit, if you will, about the role that the women played in your life as a child and how that transcended to adulthood for you as you navigated a career that wasn't always forgiving to you.
So I think the women that I write about, obviously my mother and my grandmother, these are women that a lot of Black women can relate to, that you see in your own families all the time. And while it's very tempting all the time to see them in the mode of being resilient, persevering, and those are all great attributes, and I'm glad that they have them. But there's also something very sad about it as well, because and this is something I think all Black women have to deal with, especially since the trope of us being the strong Black woman is such a thing. Is that, yeah, that strength is important. I think we do have it and we know how to access it. But at the same time, why is our superpower the ability to withstand bullshit? Yeah. Like, why is that the superpower? Yeah. Right? Like, it's kind of messed up. And so I saw, my grandmother, she was married 3 times, and she was emotionally and physically abused in every marriage that she had. My mother, she is on, her second marriage. Her first marriage, it was a whole lot that went on there, which y'all can read about in the book. And even, being in a abusive relationship with my biological father. So her strength came from a very painful place. And it's not a badge of honor, right, to have to go through all of that. But at the same time, survivors gonna survive. And they very much passed on to me those survival instincts of, no matter what, make sure you're in a position that you can do for yourself, that you don't have to depend on anybody, because they spent so much of their lives being in dependent relationships, still strong, but very dependent relationships. And, vulnerability was a luxury for them, big time. And so because of that, I absorbed, of course, all those lessons. But as, I sort of write about it, I don't know, I can't tell you the moment it clicked for me, or if it was an incident that triggered it, or just me sitting around reflecting, which I often do. But at some point I was like, I just don't want to be in survival mode my whole life. Yeah. I just don't. I was like, I want to be able to live, enjoy, breathe, do all these things that as human beings that, are afforded dignity should be able to do. And unfortunately, I saw too many women who were in, my life who were robbed of their dignity for so long. The only thing they knew how to do was to survive.
I will tell you, I told Jemele this, I'll tell you guys. We're all getting a lot closer during this conversation, but I literally had a whole therapy session around Jemele's book because just hearing you say that, though, survival mode, I did not know there was another way to exist other than
Correct.
survival mode. And reading about some of the things you went through, there are some people wouldn't be able to survive some of those things. And so when I jump ahead a bit to some of the controversy you face in life with people having the temerity to have an opinion about you, and you read about her survival, and you look at the people who are criticizing you, and you think about all the things you went through, and it's like, where do you get off having an opinion about it? But given all the things you survived, it makes you wonder, why is everybody else so basic? Like, could you survive all this,
But you know what, Tiffany, that's such a good observation. And this is why, and even though some people looked at me sideways when I said it, not necessarily in a bad way, but thinking that I was just trying to talk tough. But if you read the memoir, you see why I say this. Donald Trump tweeting about me, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the former press secretary, saying I should be fired. You read the book. It doesn't even really rank compared to everything else. I'm like, that's the worst. Like, dog, you have no idea. Okay. I'm like, have you been shown crack as a 9-year-old? Right. No, you have not. Okay, then. So let's talk when that's your reality. Right. And so that is why I think I'm able to have an amazing amount of perspective around even around this very public career that people see as when, you have setbacks at work, or even the very public sort of career castigation that I went through. That is why I was able to look at it like, all right, well, this is bad, and professionally this hurts, but personally I can get over it. I mean, Donald Trump tweeting in some rant is like laughable. Yeah. It's like not even special. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, all right, so today is Thursday. Yeah.
Right. A retired kleptomaniac golfer.
Right, exactly. It's like, all right, I'm supposed to give his opinion any level of validation. Like, who cares?
His first job in government was president. You know what I mean? Good job, America. Good job, America. Anyway, I want to jump ahead a bit because when you were in college, this is something I didn't know about you. When you were in college, there was also controversy around you. Yes.
Why does it find me? It's so weird.
But I think it finds you because you have always spoken or written about an unapologetic truth. And so we all remember where we were when they announced the OJ verdict.
Yeah.
And Jemele writes about that time, and she had a unique take, which as you guys read the book, you'll discover. And there were people on campus of all hues who took issue with your take there. And I just wonder, society may have caught up with you by now, but at the time, when you speak an unapologetic truth and nobody else hears you, what is that like as a young woman on college facing that backlash?
So to give you guys, I guess, a little more context, like I've been getting hate mail since, probably my freshman or sophomore year. First time I got called a racial slur was when I went to Michigan State. And, the thing is, I guess it's just my timing sucks. I'm a little too far ahead. You know what I mean? Yeah, I'll give this part away because I know you all will definitely still read the book. Is that how controversial is it to say that O.J. Simpson does not deserve the protection of black people just because he is facing a murder trial and we see the systemic abuses? He did not deserve us. That was what I wrote. Given the fact he did everything to distance himself from our community. What is it? The phrase is like, you want our rhythm, not our blues. Yeah. That was O.J. Simpson. I wrote this in 1995, and somehow that was very controversial to write. And I'm really good at being hated by multiple groups. Like, I'm very good at this. So the black people at Michigan State did not appreciate this opinion at all. I was like, but this is so basic to me. Yeah. Like, you see this dude kind of parading in, trying to be down because, and we're covering for him. And he just didn't deserve it. And so I wrote that, and I got a lot of backlash. The president of the Black Student Alliance on campus called me Aunt Jemima in front of an entire black student body.
Where is she now?
Actually, she's my Facebook friend. Because I have a forgiving spirit. And I realize you're in college, you say dumb shit. It happens. And so, so I got in their crosshairs a couple of times by saying, some things. So that was like my first experience with understanding that you have to write for truth. And you can't write. It's like the old adage when they tell you, when you dance like nobody's in the room. That's the way you freely dance. When you write, it's the same concept. While you certainly want people to read what you wrote, you want them to critically think about the piece, but you cannot write honestly worried about reaction. And so what I loved about my time as an opinion columnist, my first foray into it at Michigan State, was the fact that I learned that lesson. And I'm also, and my husband will probably tell you, I'm very oblivious to some things. And I will say these things not realizing everybody ain't on board, right? So when I tweeted that about Donald Trump being a white supremacist, I was like, oh, I thought we all knew. Like, oh, y'all didn't know. Oh, I'm breaking news here. Like, I thought we agreed. Like, what? Did I miss the meeting where we didn't agree? Yeah.
It depends on the we you're talking about.
True that. And so when, the same thing when I said that about O.J. Simpson, I was like, oh, I thought at the meeting we had decided that he wasn't allowed back in. Clearly, I was not there at the beginning. Maybe I showed up late.
Well, what that did do for you was prepare you for what was to come.
Mm-hmm.
Because even before the Trump controversy, just really your path to showing up at ESPN, a Black woman covering sports, and certainly I don't know anything about navigating TV networks, but
not at all.
As a Black woman in that space, it can be very lonely. Mm-hmm. And one of the beautiful things about you, just your spirit, is you build allies. You extend your sisterhood. You don't just hold hands. You chain a soul with those of us in this space with you. And that's how you survived at ESPN. You didn't show up and think, I'm alone in this space. You showed up and said, oh, I see you, and you. Let's coalesce. So talk a bit, if you will, about your thoughts around doing that at ESPN and how that benefit you.
So I've never been the girl or the woman, if you will, that wanted to be the only Black person in the room, that I wanted to be the only Black woman there. There are people, and we know this, that want to be the only one, and they don't want to make space for anybody else, and they don't want to open the door or even the window, or even crack it, like for anybody else. And that's because, when you are the only one and you're facing a level of responsibility that's uncomfortable, like suddenly you got to speak for every Black person because you're the only one, or you may not even have the agency to speak. So why would I want to be the only one in the room? I wouldn't. And I've always found, and maybe this is, part of one of the reasons I love sports and certainly loved playing team sports growing up, is that you have to have a teamwork mentality, especially with us. Is that, listen, if we're the only two in a certain space, what do I look like trying to make you fail? Mm-hmm. What do I look like trying to undermine you? So I've always believed in the principle of, one, what's for you is for you. And two, even if I think what's for you was for me, you getting that doesn't subtract from me, and it also lifts the rest of us, right? Just by the presence. So, of course, I talk about in the book about, Carrie, our friend Carrie, when she got to ESPN, Carrie Champion. And, Sir Carrie's not here, so just want you to know, but I'll tell her you said hello. But when Carrie got to ESPN, there was this narrative that was building that we should be pitted against each other. That because I moonlit in the job that she eventually got permanently, that there wasn't room for both of us. And that is why when she got there, I went out of my way to reach out to her. I emailed her. Heifer didn't respond to me for 2 months. Like, it was almost over before it started. But that was because, as I later found out, she actually didn't know how to work her email, which is very Carrie. So, and when we, talked and everything, I tried to put her up on all the stuff I'd heard about the position coming in, because they had a very defined and very narrow, insulting vision of that job. And as she likes to joke, she was like, you might have come on a little too strong. Because I was like, girl, this is what you got to do. You got to fight. I'm up in there giving her the whole Big Mama speech. Like, we like this fist. And she's like, that's a lot. I just met you. So I was just trying to make sure that she was in the best position to succeed by telling her, like, this is what they've been whispering. They said they want somebody who is seen and not heard. And, Carrie has a voice. And so just how you know how to move and operate, I'm not saying you give into that, but know that you're going to get some backlash because you do not fit. They think that they got somebody who's just going to sit there. And I could tell already they don't have that person. So the joke is going to be on them. And wherever I've gone and as I've moved throughout my career, I've tried very hard to make sure that I'm somebody that, whether you're a younger journalist, a mid-career journalist, older journalist, that, Black people, Black women especially, know that I'm always rooting for you. As long as you with us, I'm rooting for you. When you ain't with us, I ain't rooting for you, just so you know. But if you with us, I'm rooting for you, and I want to see you succeed, and I will do everything possible. And I feel like because I've always had that spirit, and this isn't the reason I did it, this is, I think, why my career has gone a certain way. And to some degree, the proof of that was when all the stuff did go down with Donald Trump, the amount of support I had was really quite overwhelming. And I think that speaks to who I've always represented myself to be, and just how I've tried to just operate with integrity and with this spirit that, we can all make it. We don't have to act like it's a zero-sum proposition. Because sometimes when people do stuff and you notice no one says anything to defend them, that says a lot about what their circle looks like or who they think their allies are.
Yeah. You notice who's in the group chat and who's not.
You sure do.
Yeah, very true. And I think that brings us to, I want to do my Barbara Walters now and try to make Jemele cry. Let's talk about vulnerable Jemele. So
look, I was already on Red Table Talking, dude. If you don't cry on that show, it's like me and Willow the only one, like, what they crying for?
Well, but there was a moment that you did cry, and you write about it in the book, which I think if you guys have read it and when you read it, so many of us understand that moment because it was not tears of sadness. It was tears of exhaustion after having to navigate white man bullshit, at ESPN, of people just daggers at you everywhere, where you have to not only defend your professional worth, but defend your humanity. And at a moment where you were at, not necessarily at your breaking point, but you were at a transitioning point. This was after Jemele sent the tweet about Donald Trump, and then later about Jerry Jones, who didn't have a problem with people taking a knee in a bathroom, but it did on the field. Anyway.
That's the Tiffany cross I know. come through with that singer, Tiff.
I know sports sometimes.
You do.
Yeah.
You're an expert. We already established that.
So, but you write in that moment about just you broke in that moment with the president of ESPN. Talk to us about what was going through your mind.
So at that point, where I couldn't even open up the Twitter app on my phone because it crashed every time because it was just so many tweets that people were sending me. And just, my life is just feeling like it's in disarray. I'm being discussed everywhere and dissected, and the hate mail and the hate voicemail at that time, and just threats, and, you walking through the hallways in ESPN and you could feel the whispers and all this other stuff. And so the president of ESPN at the time, John Skipper, he called me into his office to discuss these tweets about Donald Trump, because I think this preceded the Jerry Jones tweet. And, he started off pretty calm, and then he got real mad, and so it was just dealing with all of that it finally just maybe not broke something in me. I was just like, I'm tired. So I just had kind of an unraveling moment in his office. And I know in reflection why I was crying, but at the time I was like, I don't know why I'm crying right now. What is happening? As I'm trying to, because he asked me, I think the question that led to it, he asked me if I thought the people who voted for Trump, like my colleagues, he's like, there's some people in this building at this campus that have voted for Donald Trump. Do you think they're all racist? And, in my mind, I was thinking, kind of. Maybe not an absolute yes, but I'm like, you got to be a little bit, right?
Or be okay with it,
or be okay with it, which makes you
Yeah.
kind of racist. If you're like, it's cool, he's bigoted, but I can deal with it because taxes. It's like, what?
Yeah.
So at any rate, I was just like, okay. Then I'm trying to explain to him why at this time, this moment in our country, why as a black woman, especially in a space like ESPN on SportsCenter in a high profile position, why you just felt after the election and it lingered for so long. We've gotten many historical signs that this country did not care about us, right? There's no question. So that was not the first, but it just cut so deep because you're just like, so half of y'all really willingly did this to the rest of us? Like there's a lack of, complete, or there is a complete disregard, for the safety of the marginalized groups, because that's what was being compromised. And I don't care, just because I was at ESPN, that didn't mean that I didn't feel that in some ways too, about what this was about to embolden and stoke, and had been stoking in a lot of people, because this was a month after Charlottesville when I sent those tweets. And we saw in full display that KKK rally that happened in Virginia, and it was just like, wait, what? So you want me to just be like, I'm good, no, I couldn't. I just could not turn that off. And so all of that combined with all of the backlash and everything that was happening, as you so appropriately put it, it was just like, I am exhausted by having to explain to, and Skipper is a friend, I just want y'all to know that, explain to this white man why this is all kind of hitting me, the way that it is. And the other part of it too was, there was, and I probably shouldn't have felt this way, but there was also tears of humiliation a little bit, because he sent me home like I was in third grade. And I was like, what? He was like, I just don't think you should do the show today. Like, you should go home. And I was like, word? Like, I've never been sent home from a job ever in my life, I mean, even in school, never been suspended, none of that. So that was like really something to take in that moment. Like, I am being sent home from my job. Ain't this a bitch? Like, so yeah, that was a very like emotionally striking moment. And I think it was that whole sequence that occurred from, the tweets to the suspension to, post suspension. I was in a full-fledged breakup with this company I worked at for 11 years and had been the best job I'd had. And, they always tell you that on a personal level, if you break up with somebody, you've been thinking about it for at least 6 months, right? That was indeed true, because I was thinking about it, in September, October 2017. And, we officially parted ways in September of 18.
Well, part of you parting ways with ESPN also meant parting ways with Michael Smith, your co-host.
Yep.
As we talk, especially about as black women, we talk a lot about feeling lonely in this space, having a lack of allies. Michael Smith was your ally. He was not a scab. He said, I will not do this show without Jemele Hill.
Correct.
And he said on the sidelines, if they were going to send you home, that meant he was taking a step back as well. What did Michael's loyalty to you mean? And what's the relationship with you guys now?
Oh, no. I mean, it meant, everything. And the thing is, even when I got suspended, like, he was like, I don't want to do this show the entire time. And unfortunately, he was only able to make that work for a couple of days, maybe even one day. I don't even know if it was a couple of days, because contracts, you know what I'm saying? Like, then it becomes like a different issue. And, there was no way that he could, nor would I have wanted him to sacrifice his standing, for me. And the whole time he was super supportive. And as he often reminded people, and I agreed, okay? And, that meant really everything. And it wasn't in those moments, it wasn't just him. So the day that they sent me home, they tried to replace me with, some other anchors. And
all black women, right?
Black people, because Mike was like, I ain't working. So they had to replace both of us, right? And so then they called, my good friends Michael Eves and L. Duncan. They were like, nope, sorry. In fact, when they called Eves, I was with him because we was at the bar. But story for another day. And he was like, nah, man, he wasn't doing it. None of them were doing it. And I didn't even ask them to do that, but they immediately sort of jumped in lockstep. And Mike was the same way. And, I think as a woman in this business, it's really hard to find male allies, especially in a super male sports like a super male space like sports, to find a trustworthy ally, a man who is not on some dumb shit, right? Like that's hard to find. Yeah. And, when we started working together and even when we started our friendship, it's like we always went in with the idea of we may not agree on everything, but we in lockstep, right? We are like-minded even if we don't always agree. And so there was a lot of battles. The good thing is that we were sort of used to it because there was a lot of battles that we had to fight with them. And even behind closed doors, I might be like, are you crazy, this and that? But in front of them, it was like, united front. CMB, we all we got. So that was like our attitude. So I wasn't surprised at all that Mike had that attitude. For me, one of the things that was, I don't know if I would say I felt guilty about, but that like it did really make me emotional is because the thing is when you're a pair, when that's what you're positioned as, and especially because we're also good friends as well, that your actions impact each other, right? Because they brought us to SportsCenter as a pair. We got our own TV show as a pair. So we have to be locked at the hip. So that means if, I'm in trouble and they're after me, by extension, he's in trouble too. Because they didn't design this as a one-person show. They designed it as a two-person show. So my future impacted his. And what was even worse is when I'm going through all that, the network treated him like he was disposable. And that was really kind of unforgivable. They didn't care about how it would impact him to have me gone or just all the, all the controversy, like, they didn't really ask any questions about like, is he all right? What is he like? They just didn't care. And that was, for him, that was his breaking point moment. And he didn't even know he reached it until, he left much later after I did. But that was the one where like, oh, they really showed me who they are. And, in terms of our relationship today, that's still the homie. It's different because obviously we live thousands of miles apart, but whenever we come together, we always joke about like, talk about some trauma bond, and I was like, dog, like and it wasn't really just that, it was like the whole experience on SportsCenter in general. Yeah. And I'm happy for him that he's able, because now he's on NBC and he's doing Thursday Night Football on Amazon. And I think for a while he went through, and I don't want to speak for him, but I could just kind of tell, just as his friend and from afar, that I think for a while he was a little lost in terms of like, it just took him some time after the way ESPN treated him to figure out like, do I even love this anymore? And he was one of the best NFL reporters that there was in the business. And so I think he had to really do some soul searching to figure out how to regain kind of that passion back that made us into his and hers.
Yeah. I know there are probably questions in the audience, so I have two more questions, but you guys can make your way to the microphone if you do have questions. One of the things about you and Mike Jemele that I found very relatable is having to defend your blackness. There remains this instinct in cable news that you have to appeal to people in the flyover states, aka white people. Every time they say that to me, I'm like,
I was like, flyover? Right. What the euphemism? But
you live in a flyover state. So I always tell people, we talk to people in Detroit, in Cleveland, in Minneapolis. Right. Like, aren't those flyover states?
It's like the rural voters, right? Or white, or the working class. Like, we know what they're really saying.
Because there are working class people of color. There are rural, rural people of color. Yeah. So that was something that I just thought was so out of step with ESPN. And I have a young assistant. He's 24. And I remember he didn't know we were friends, and he was like, man, I just remember the downfall of ESPN when Jemele and Mike left, then Carrie left, and it was just nobody watched ESPN anymore. And it's like, why doesn't that viewer count as much as the people they're trying to appeal to? A shrinking demographic, they would bypass a growing demographic in the rising majority.
Yeah, and that was frustrating. I mean, that was among the many creative battles that we faced, is that, culturally, we made no secret about the fact of who, not necessarily we were trying to appeal to, but just intrinsically, because we're black and really find joy in our blackness, that was going to come out in the product that we were trying to present to people every day. And you're right. I mean, look, when we were in SportsCenter, and as I write about in the memoir, and they really came at us about the decline in white viewership, even though that white viewership had been declining. Mm-hmm. And even though when they first gave us the opportunity to be on SportsCenter, one of the key things that they said to us is that they wanted to increase the black viewership, which had been declining. And so, of course, as soon as we show up, like, black people in the building, like, we were good, right? Yeah. But to them, even though we had to be, I think at the time, in terms of black viewership, we had the second highest. I think First Take was the only one that was higher than ours, which is really not surprising. But, and that wasn't good enough. They didn't see value in that. It's like suddenly, then they wanted us to roll back and stop. They didn't say it this way, but certainly with some of the things they did, this was their mentality, is like they wanted the show to stop being so black. And I don't know how to do that because I'm black. Right. So, like, how do I make it stop being so black? You want me to stop the New Jack City references? Well, I'm not. So, it's like they...
Are you your brother's keeper?
See, that CMB joke was going to ride. I don't care what y'all say. And even to the point where, once they decided that they wanted a certain type of SportsCenter, they took down our personality wall in the back, which had... it was like we were the only show that had that, and that was supposed to be a trademark. And so when that management shift happened, and that was one of the first things they put on the chopping block, because on the personality wall, like Mike had pictures of him and his family. We had pictures of when we went to the White House twice, flexing. And so we had like all that on there. We had Biggie up there. We had John Carlos and Tommy Smith. We had some black shit up there because we black, right? And it was the Obama picture that they were the most worried about. And they didn't want to look like they were targeting Obama, but they were. And so they made us take down the whole thing. And it was just like, really? Yeah. That's where we are? And so I know to some people on the outside, that might seem like a small thing, but it's telling you something very big when you do that. Like, oh, they just don't. And I remember after we had, real quick, because I know we got to get to these questions, we had Sanaa Lathan and Gina Prince Bythewood on the show. This is when the show Shots Fired was out that they did together. And Gina Prince Bythewood, who did Woman King, hope y'all saw it. Please support. It's a great movie. She came on, she had a shirt that said feminist on it, right? And Sanaa was with her. And it was some kind of anniversary about Love and Basketball, but we used them having the show Shots Fired to get them on. We really wanted to talk to them about Love and Basketball because they have such, that was one of our favorite movies, and they have such Gina and Sanaa have such a great relationship and funny stories about that movie. And next thing I know, I mean, like the next day, all these right-wing publications are writing about, they start calling us Woke Center. Right? We did not talk to them about politics at all. Now, the gist of her show, Shots Fired, was about, I believe, a black cop who had shot an unarmed white teen. Right? So, it was a very heavy story. And I think, and when you get interviews, especially when it's related to a new project, you have to ask them a question about that. Usually a lot of publicists make that clear. So I think we may have asked them one question. The rest of the time we spent asking Love and Basketball. But yet the story was that these two black people had on this black woman who was wearing this feminist shirt on ESPN, and how dare you? And, it just got eviscerated, like everywhere in that right-wing space. And next thing I know, when celebrities are coming through there to do car washes, black celebrities, they're not finding their way to our show, right? And we asked for certain black celebrities to be on there that we wanted, and it's getting a lot of resistance. And I was like, this is very, very telling. And kind of the message was being sent that, hey, it was two incidents because they weren't back to back, but they were close together. Chance the Rapper came on our show, and he was wearing a pro Colin Kaepernick shirt. Again, we do not control what the guests wear. Like, we don't send them directives. But as you all know, sometimes black people just showing up is considered an act of defiance, of political resistance. I'm like, I just came to work. That's all I did. I just asked Gina Prince Bythewood about her show, and that now all of a sudden is all of this. So you get tired of those fights and those battles because you feel like, why am I explaining to people my need to exist? Just got real sick of it.
Yeah, it's a sad day when right-wing outlets,
I know,
propaganda networks dictate what we can do.
The thing about ESPN, even though they're a monstrous, massive platform, and culturally the most important sports platform maybe that ever existed, they real sensitive. Yeah. And it's like if the right, like you said, in their and we see this across other institutions, in their mind, the complaints from a certain group matter more than sometimes even the majority. Yeah. Yeah. One or two people or like a few publications wrote that whole woke center and ESPN's too political crap, and suddenly that was all they chose to focus on. Not all the people who love the fact that they saw, fine Sanaa Lathan on our show. Exactly. Not sure if she's 25 or 85 because she's a black woman. I'm like, God, you have no right to look that gorgeous. They ain't care about that. But, I'm
your
sure.
Viewers did.
If they did, I'm sure Scarlett Johansson would have wore that shirt. It wouldn't have been no more white people on the show.
Yes, exactly.
But anyway.
And now you are bigger than the network. So here we are.
Well, I don't know that, but I'll take it. I outgrew it is the way I would look at it.
I see we have a long line of questions. I'll just ask you guys. We want to get to everybody's questions, so if you can keep your questions brief.
Okay.
And please go right ahead.
All right. Good evening,
Ms.
ladies.
Tuskegee.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. So the statement that you made about write as if no one is in the room really resonated, and so I just wanted to ask, what advice would you give to non-writers wanting to write about workplace trauma, being a black woman and an officer, but being scared about potential backlash because our officer community in our particular organization is like really small?
Okay. So I think the same rule actually applies. That's not a rule just for writers. I think in general, whether you're trying to be vocal or whether you're trying to write, is that if you have something inside of you that you cannot rest until you speak a truth to, then you have to be obedient to that voice. Because you deserve to be. Like, number one, understand that you should speak up because you deserve and have a right to. So this is not a permission thing. And you can't ask for permission in something that's that delicate and important to you. So I would say, regardless of if you're a writer, speak it if you need to speak it, because clearly if you're thinking about it, it's something in you that won't rest until you do. So pay attention to that.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Brandy Sims, proud NABJ member.
All right, shout out to NABJ.
First NABJ convention was 1992 in Detroit, your hometown.
That was my first one too.
That's where I met Rob Parker. Rob's been a big inspiration to me.
My boy.
And he told me he met you when you were 16.
It's true.
And he was the first black sports columnist at the Detroit Free Press. My question to you, Jemele, is what type of inspiration has Rob Parker had on your career?
So I always tell this story about Rob. Rob was getting me cussed out at 16 years old. So even though Detroit is obviously very black, 85, 90% black at the time when Rob worked there, again, you always, the most basic things, it's crazy that they're controversial when somebody black says it. Rob wrote a column about Marshot. Marshot, who is one of the worst owners ever in professional sports. Notorious racist. Like, the facts and the receipts are there. Rob had the nerve to come in there and say Marshot should not be a Major League Baseball owner. How shocking, right? And then even though Detroit's makeup is what it is, the level of hatred that column produced was staggering. But this is why I also say there's Detroit and then there's Michigan. Michigan showed up on that column, not Detroit. And I was answering the phones in the Free Press Sports Department at the time when Rob got there. And I remember being very excited because, yeah, it is kind of crazy that back in like 1992, 1993, the Free Press, again, in a city that black, just got its first black sports columnist, which is kind of crazy. So Rob writes this column. Phone lines are lighting up. So I'm getting cussed out every other call because of Rob Parker. And I was like, he's not here because columnists didn't actually have to come into the paper. And I remember when I finally saw him, instead of being happy to see him, I was like, here's your messages because I've been getting cussed out about you all afternoon. And a friendship was formed. But Rob is one of the OGs in this business, especially being somebody who's covered baseball as well as intelligently and as thoughtfully as he has. He's definitely one of the many big brothers that I had in this business. So, love you, Rob.
While we're letting the next person come up, I just want to say that a part of Jemele's softening and vulnerability is certainly due to the love of her life. That's me. No. I'm just kidding. Ian Wallace, her husband, is here with us tonight, so I just wanted to acknowledge.
Oh.
All right, please go right ahead with your question.
Hi, Jemele. My question has to do with how do you define your joy now? And how
Y'all getting deep. Okay. Okay. Defining my joy.
Yeah, and what projects do you have in the future? Because I really see like you doing your own brand and your own thing. So.
Well, I define my joy much differently now than I think I did before, especially from a career standpoint. Yeah, I thought that I would have made it if I just made $50,000 a year. Just working at Sports Illustrated. I was like, woo, I will have made it. Y'all can't tell me nothing. But now I think I find joy in service. That's how I defined it. And by service, which coincides with your second question about projects I have coming up. So next week, the first podcast on the podcast network I created with Spotify is launching. It's a podcast called The Black Girl Bravado. And I created this network in partnership with Spotify for black women, centers black women led. And yes, you can clap for that. So the whole point of this space, because, when I got into podcasting, granted, Mike and I had a podcast at ESPN, which eventually led to us having a TV show. But when I got into it as a solo host with Spotify back in 2019, while there are certainly black podcasts for sure, but the ones for black women that center black women, it was like very sporadic, here and there. And fast forward to, 2020, when allegedly this country was in a racial reckoning, which it wasn't, but because we see shit is right back to normal, like it used to be. So when all that was going on, which, as depending on the space you're in, if you're black, real good time to hit up white people for some money. And so am I lying? I mean, did I lie about this? Because they was feeling guilty to the mug. I had white people apologizing to me for all kind of stuff. I'm just behind you at Starbucks. It's okay. I know you did not single-handedly start slavery. It's all good. So, Spotify, like a lot of companies, we're really trying to figure out how can we be more supportive of black creators. Like, what can we do? Help us be an ally. Teach us. This is what you can do. You can, we can create this project, together. And they were fully on board. And so there has never been anything like it in the marketplace. Of course, the story of black women, in addition to what we're able to withstand, the other trope that's very familiar when it comes to us is the savior trope. Like, we all were born with capes. And that, you got Stacey Abrams saving the democracy. You got, a bunch of black women that saving Wakanda. Like, we just saving all the time. And while that is an important piece of who we are, it is not all we are. So I wanted to create a network that looked at how black women love, how they relate, how they worship, how they cry, how they laugh, like all of these different things. I'm not saying I have everything figured out about us, but I wanted to create a product where we all felt that something in it represented who we are and was a reflection back. So that has been a massive undertaking. And the fact that it's, premiering next week with the Black Girl Bravado, which is a podcast that was always in existence that we now license exclusively to Spotify. These two dope sisters, Germany and Brittany. It's a wellness podcast because they talk about self-care, self-love, relationships, all kinds of things, but major homegirl vibes. So they give it to you real and raw, and it's really hilarious, but also really soothing at the same time. And then the following week, our first original podcast we're launching is called Sanctified with Deborah Joy Winans. Yes, that Winans. And LaVon Briggs. And so worship looks different for Black women in 2022. As you all, if you have any familiarity with the church, especially the Black church, you see that 80 to 85% of church membership, women. Church leadership, men, right? And so they're having very introspective conversations about purity culture being a scam, about, abortion, sexuality, all these things that inside the Black church are very taboo to talk about, but they talking about them and in a way y'all have never heard. It's funny, it's thoughtful, it's critical, it's passionate. In every episode, they have a different Black woman on who gives a testimony about something that impacted her related to church. Very powerful stuff. It has all the things. So I hope you all will support these two ventures. You'll see me pub it like crazy. So I encourage you to listen. And beyond all that, expanding my storytelling capabilities. Of course, I still write for The Atlantic. Writing will always be a huge part of me. But now I'm doing producing. So I'm executive producing Colin Kaepernick's 30 for 30 documentary, directed by Spike Lee. And that's gonna be great. So there's that, and just, I'm looking to stretch myself and build, but to amplify, and not just me. A lot of, other Black women out there who I feel like need that. So.
And giving advice to the group chat on a daily
And giving
basis.
advice to the group chat as well. We'll never stop that.
So, I know I'm supposed to ask a question, but I want to take this time to thank you. Thank you because I'm a benefactor of all that Jemele has to offer. I grew up in Detroit Free Press, high schooler, going to the Free and doing our newspaper. And during that time, there was Jemele, Kelly L. Carter, Suzette Hackney. The three of them, they really, without even saying anything, or they gave insights, but you can watch them and learn how to operate in a newsroom without losing yourself, which is critical in our community. And so I just want to thank you for imparting that. And I'm not in journalism anymore. I'm a chief of staff with the federal government. But my elevation...
Probably getting paid a lot more money than you ever did as a journalist.
True.
Yes, it's okay.
My elevation is I still use it there. So just thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad you came. It's so good to see you.
Yeah.
So this is going to be our last.
All right, final question. No pressure.
I know. I'm like, wow. Hi, I'm Tony. I'm from Detroit. What up, though?
What up, though?
What up, though?
That's our universal greeting. Nobody get scared.
Right. And we say pop instead of soda.
You got it. But now I'm mad. Where's your buffs? You ain't got no buffs on?
I know. I ain't got my cardio on. So I left it at home. But one of my questions is, it's so interesting how lately the buzz topic is diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to live in that space and how to be unapologetically Black. How does that translate to you now? Because we all know that this conversation's been happening a long time ago. But now when it's filmed and it's videotaped, we're like, oh, now we have to talk about the inhumanity against Black people. And how does that translate in journalism?
So, I know. Tim, I got thoughts. I mean, here's the thing, though, is, one, it hasn't translated. I mean, let's just be really real about that. But I do think that there's a map of accountability that's there. And we have to stop having, these conversations in some way. And we have to start framing them, not to stop having them in this regard. To give you an example in journalism, one of the conversations I'm truly sick of is when you have major organizations that have resources, and even if you have small ones, I'm not going to even limit it to size, still coming to black people talking about I just can't find any.
Don't get me started. I'm in HR. I'm like,
right? Or
let's
like,
not do it.
or where can I, or,
Yeah.
using, where do I look? Using black people as they individual yellow pages. And I'm like, here's the thing, white hiring people, is that, when you're looking for black people, use that same energy when you're looking for white people, right? It's very simple. At this point in 2022, it's not a mystery where the black people are. We out here. Like, if you're in a hiring position and you're looking for, entry-level candidates, I'm sorry, there's 1,000 HBCUs out here. Like, you could literally walk up on Howard's campus and be like, where the black people? Oh, you right here? Let me give you a job. Like, they act like diversity or inclusion is going to come up to them and be like, hey, I'm diversity and inclusion, hello. I was like, no, you actually have to effort this. You have to cultivate candidates. You have to develop them. You have to do, again, all the same things that you do with white people. And so I'm just tired of them coming to me with the excuses. So I'm like, I'm not in this whole, I'm not going to be the kind, gentle Negro who is softly guiding you to find I'm putting it all on you now. Like, what have you done? Who have you reached out to? Oh, you've done none of that? Call me later. I don't have time for that. I'm not going to explain to you how you can go to professional organizations, campuses. Like, there's so many resources out there. So the ignorance of not knowing is no longer an excuse. Google it. So you have to move them past that part of it. Yeah. And then, again, it's about accountability. To give you an example, when all the stuff that went down at Spotify with Joe Rogan, right? I was, like a lot of people, not surprised. You know what you paid for. This is what you're going to get. And when the, higher-ups wanted to know my opinion about this, which in some cases was the first time a couple higher-ups had ever even talked to me, I was like, oh, so now you got somebody out there wilding about black folks, and now you want to come talk to me. Right. Cool. So what I pointed out in that conversation, because I saw that the CEO of Spotify said it, that they were creating this $100 million fund that, because they paid Joe Rogan like $100 million, maybe even over that, to license his podcast. And I was like, how you just got out there and told everybody you got $100 million for the black people? Go use that shit. Go hire. Like, that's my instruction for you, is that when black people come through Spotify and they have a voice and they want a podcast, give them money, support them, let them hire who they want to hire, and stay out of their way. And, people ask me, like, why, did I think about leaving Spotify when this happened or anything like that? And I didn't. I don't even know Joe Rogan. Like, what do I look like? Like, I don't know him, and I have a bigger mission in mind. The stupid stuff that he does has nothing to do with me. I'm trying to build this network for black women. Yeah. Joe Rogan is not going to, intercede on me doing that. That's bigger than him, right? So no, I'm not going to leave because of Joe Rogan. Because for sure, if I got into some stuff, he ain't leaving because of me. He ain't leaving that check on the table for sure. So why would I do that, right? And so I say all that to say is that I think if you remind them of what they said, but like, you did say in 2020, you put up the black square, right? Okay, I'm just bringing that up. You said the black square. So now I find that it's effective when you throw it back. Shame works.
And I just want to add really quickly, because you're asking about journalism, the way you frame the question, I think we also have to change how we think of it. Because if you listen to how we talk about it, you can go hire more black people, but you hear that the power structure still rests solely with the white people to extend an opportunity to us. Right. Once we shift that paradigm, that perhaps you're not looking to hire the black woman, you're looking to be hired by the black woman. And that is when you get into a real conversation of discomfort. Of equity. Exactly. And that is the thing that make people uncomfortable. As long as I'm doling out something to you, I'm fine with it. The second that I lose that power structure and I have to come and ask you for something, that's the equality and liberation of black folks that we're fighting for.
Amen, Tiffany Cross.
And I think that concludes the Q&A portion, but Jemele is going to stick around and sign books. She does have her personal bodyguard, Ian, here.
And another real one, too.
Yes, and a real bodyguard.
So
Travel with
listen,
them goons. Don't
hey,
get comfortable.
I'm telling you, you run up, you get done up in here.
Okay, and just wait, listen really quickly for instructions for how to get your book
I'm
signed.
so glad everybody's so excited. Please line up at this podium right here to get your book signed. Thank you all for being here.
Okay, because wait, I gave you the Oh, okay, all right. Oh, yeah. Appreciate it. Oh, yeah, real fast.